Hello, fellow sleuths. I am glad to see you all made it back from Orpo in one piece, but now it is time to break down episode 5, Trojan's Horse. So crack open a cold bottle of farm fresh reintegration milk and let's kick it off where the episode begins. And it looks like we finally meet the guy that Felicia told Irv about during their conversation that now comes to retrieve all the products for them that they create in O&D. And in this case, it was dental tools that the O&D team pulled from what looks like a very morgue-like cabinet. It's interesting because this is not the first dental symbolism that we've seen in the show.
Right. And these may be the people they are impacting, but we actually feel this mouth wall was a representation of how many people like Miss Casey may be down below through the export hallway. And by O&D making all of these seemingly random objects for the floor, Lumen can continue their unknown research without needing to bring any goods in from the outside. Even further, the same morgue-like appearance of O&D could be another representation of just how many people are being worked on down below on the testing floor, given that they may be thought to be dead on the outside of the Lumen building. If they are truly starting to amass a large number of people, this could be the creation of a new small army for the Egan family, similar to what we see in the shadows of the painting The Pardoning of Kier's Betrayers when you're walking onto the severed floor out of the elevator.
But now it's time for all of you to head outside to your local phone booth where Outtie Irv is continuing to reach out to his contact and further investigate what's really happening at Lumen. Firstly, who is he trying to contact? Because it seems to be someone who isn't readily available. Could it be Ragabi? Sure. But me and Rob feel like it's either someone else at the Resistance or Lumen sprung another leak. And we have both shifted our thoughts on Irv. Initially, we were under the impression that Outtie Irv was plagued with the image of the hallway and it was consuming him at home, causing him to obsess over it and just paint all night. But now it seems more likely that Outtie Irv is the one with the knowledge of the export hallway. How? We don't know. His military background may play a role. Either way, it looks like his plan to force a message to the innie succeeded.
Yeah, what seems the most likely is that Irving and others from this resistance group outside of Lumen learn that the veil between the innie and outie consciousness is the thinnest when they're asleep. So, to your point, he wasn't obsessing and staying up late on accident. He was depriving himself of sleep and painting that same image of the export hallway repeatedly, all on purpose. Essentially, trying to burn the image into his brain and then allow it to start showing up in the dreams that inevitably were going to happen when his innie fell asleep at his job due to the lack of rest outside. So, through the feedback he was getting from Milchick and the results of his innie's actions, he knew the painting was reaching his innie. And also, we know by doing this, it led directly to him being interested and getting the directions from Felicia that we see that he's passed on to Dylan now, who Dylan just trying to hang in there. And lastly, this episode gave us a chance to start to see some changes in both Helena and Natalie. Two characters who started off seeming to be model employees and happy to be where they are, but now are starting to either show signs of rebellion in Helena's case or discomfort for Natalie.
Yeah, in Natalie's case, I just see fear in her eyes when Milchick brings this up, almost like she's dealt with these emotions before, or she's tried to address this with Lumen and was punished for it or shot down, and now she just tries to avoid it at all costs.
And at the same time, she's probably very close to what's going on because I know we've established early that she's kind of the PR face for the company, but she's clearly privy to a lot of this deep knowledge. She knows that Helena was on the severed floor with the Glasgow, and she's also in these meetings with Seth and previously with Miss Cobell, and she has information about Cold Harbor and things like that. So she's definitely more than just a spokesperson.
Oh, yeah, 100%, for sure. She doesn't have the plausible deniability because she isn't merely being briefed on what to tell the public. She has a position of power at the table every time we see her. And the fear of losing that power that Lumen's given her may be in part why she's avoiding Milchick's concerns like the plague. With that said, we noticed that one of the positives Milchick had during his review was that he received the paintings with grace, although we know that that's not exactly how it went down. So she is holding back some information that could have hurt Milchick during that review. And let's touch on the review real quick because we get a few details. One, Milchick truly didn't approve of some of the tactics Miss Cobell was employing and may have really felt poorly about treating them like animals. Two, the tension between Milchick and Mrs. Wong has been brewing for some time, but this episode put it on full display, and she's clearly pushing his buttons, and most likely the one telling leadership about his three contentions. It may even be part of her job to report back on him to leadership about what he's doing, which is interesting because the man who created the theremin, the unique instrument that she plays, is named Sergevich Thurman, who is also a spy for the USSR. Granted, adding an instrument like the theremin may have just been an aesthetic choice that fit the retrofuturism theme of the show. However, it's another callback to the Soviet history, and the fact that it works with the body's electromagnetic fields seems a little too on brand. Anyway, back to our man Seth. Importantly, this episode refocuses back on his internal struggle with how Lumen perceives him. And his conversation with Natalie mentioned that she may have gone through similar struggles, which hints at the idea that the paintings are not the only time he's felt this way. Milchick seems increasingly uncomfortable in his own skin, which is a big theme in the show. The idea that everyone acts severed to a certain extent, since the person we are on the inside isn't always the person we show the world on the outside. And for Seth, when Drummond uses language like remember the severed workers' greater purpose and to treat them as what they really are, it reeks of slave labor and being subhuman, and it looks to be eliciting some emotions and internal struggles within him at the table. And we can see how flustered he really is in the waiting room after the meeting, as he's frantically flipping through the book they gave him, and even more so when he has his confrontation with Mark S. in the elevator, who's clearly emotionally defeated by this point. Both are not backing down, and Mark calling out the lie with the bullcrap Gazette comment sparks Seth to break character when describing Mark and Helena's tent time the way he did. That Freudian slip really puts his post-meeting state of mind into perspective. Now, in regards to Helena, it's very different. Whenever we see her, she is never in a position of any real power. She has been handled and managed in every scene we see her in, and at this point, it's really just her being used as a means to an end. Even if we think back to her meeting with Cobell after the OTC incident, she was shamed by her father, and at the time we thought Drummond might be a bodyguard or someone on her staff, but it turns out he was just most likely there to babysit her after the incident.
Yeah, she really hasn't been in control of anything, let alone meetings, which actually lends itself probably to why we see her go through this somewhat unbeknownst to everyone character arc through this season so far, where she was taking Helly's place, because she finally had a sense of, self and being able to make her own decisions a bit. And I think that's what we also started to see come through in that meeting with Natalie and Drummond, where, well, now she's had a little bit of that taste of freedom and she's starting to push back a bit and try to make her own decisions. Even though in the long run she's going along with it for the cause, she's definitely not the 100% team player she was before. Now we're looking 85%, 80% maybe.
Honestly, I question how on board she's ever been, but after the scene with Natalie and Drummond, she seemed particularly checked out, and she is very dismissive of her temper's rebalancing, even annoyed that Drummond suggested an additional obligement session, which came across as a pretty obvious reference to the auditing sessions in Scientology. Those sessions' goal is to remove body thetans to achieve a state of spiritual freedom. However, if you want to know more, there is a South Park episode you can watch. But what I think this scene showed us that was important for her character was the stark difference between how much the innies cared for her as Helly and how much Mark S. accepted her for who she was with him, versus her father not reaching out to her at all to check on how she's doing after almost being drowned, and Natalie basically saying that Lumen is okay with her safety being an acceptable risk. And we see her watching Mark leave the building, but it seems part of her anger in the conference room about not wanting to go back was because those relationships are ruined, and she doesn't want to go back as her innie because she's jealous of what Helly R will get to experience while she's back living in her own personal prison.
No, I think I agree with that entirely, especially because it seems like even Drummond gets more FaceTime than her with her father, who also referred to him as father, which I think is something to maybe keep an eye out on in the future. Don't necessarily think he is an Egan, but he's definitely drinking the Kool-Aid more than most people and is very close to the Egan family and definitely looks up to the Egan family a lot more than others. So I think that's something I want to keep an eye on, though, going forward as well.
Lastly, Ragabi came across Gemma's necklace with a design that seems like it will be significant as we dive deeper into Gemma's origin story. And we see Mark having some significant reintegration experiences and finally seeing Gemma face to face. So hopefully, this means that episodes 6 through 10 are going to feel like the drop of this roller coaster ride. And that'll wrap up this episode. As usual, we want to hear your thoughts. And if you have a topic we didn't cover, drop it in the comments so we can discuss.
And if you like what we're doing, let us and the board, sorry, again, I mean the algorithm, know by liking and subscribing. Really helps out the channel, and we really appreciate it. But until next time, stay sleuthy.